Yeah, that's it.
There we go. Good morning and welcome to the decision session for the executive member for economy and strategic planning. I'm just going to pull up the first part of the agenda. So declarations of interest, there's nothing extra I've got to declare on top of what's already recorded. Minutes of the last meeting, I obviously wasn't the main person then and wasn't at the meeting, but I'm assured that I'm able to sign them, and I've had no correspondence from Councillor Waller to say anything opposite. So I shall sign those off now. Thank you very much. Public participation, we've got 3 speakers for public participation. 2 are going to join us remotely and 1 in person. So firstly, Councillor Douglas, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. You've got 3 minutes if you'd like to start when you're ready. Okay,
thank you. I'm speaking on the York Economic Strategy and Partnership, and I have to say that I'm disappointed that it's been 8 months since the last update on the development of this strategy. The previous version expired in 2020, and even with the impact of the COVID pandemic, it's still a long time to wait for progress on this critical document, critical to the future economic development and well-being of our city. The strategy sets out to nurture an inclusive, sustainable economy, providing opportunity for all. This is hugely important. There is too much to speak on in the details now, so I wanted to pick out a couple of yawning gaps based on important data and information the Council has in its possession. I want to focus on 2 of the strategy themes outlined in the report. Thriving workforce. The strategy tells us that thriving isn't just about earning money. Health and well-being are equally important. I couldn't agree more. I wonder, Councillor Mason, if you've seen the report recently released by our public health colleagues outlining the gaping health inequalities in York. The data tells us there is a 10-year life expectancy gap between the most affluent wards in our city, such as Cotmanthorpe, and the least affluent, such as Westfield. 10 years. And to add to that, the largest portion of that life expectancy gap is proven to be economic. 40% of health inequalities are caused by low pay, low household incomes and poverty, a larger portion than can be put down to health behaviours and access to health services. And yet I noticed there is no mention of health inequalities and the economic causes in this strategy. Surely an inclusive, sustainable economy that provides opportunity for all must take this into account. I therefore ask you where and how these shocking statistics are going to be considered and tackled in this strategy. What are you going to do about it? Secondly, an economy driven by good business. I recently attended the shareholder committee where the City of York Council's arm's length, partially and fully controlled commercial arms report on the health of their businesses. I was shocked to understand that although the council is promoting an economy driven by good business, these organisations that include Make It York, Verital, Your Waste, City of York Trading and YPO are not members of the Good Business Charter scheme that the council is promoting across York. This surely shouldn't and can't be the case. If the council is committed to the scheme and strongly encouraging businesses to go through the accreditation process, the council's own company should also be members. This is something you should look into, Councillor Mason, as a matter of urgency and resolve as soon as possible. The council can't be seen to be holding other businesses to as high a standard than its own. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Rosie Pressland. Rosie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant. You've got 3 minutes to speak, so just start in your own time.
Okay. So I'm a volunteer director of the Residence Management Company. The RMC are asking for enforcement of the provision of bin and bike stores at the residence. The building houses 163 apartments and was formerly Terry's Chocolate Factory. We have waited over 6 years for PJ Livesey Construction Company to build the necessary bike storage for 186 cycles. We've also waited over 6 years for adequate bin stores. Regarding the bin stores, what is currently proposed only accommodates 50% of bins as per CYC requirements. A previous enforcement application from 2019 was acknowledged, but nothing happened beyond this. Planning Officer Eric Matthews at a recent meeting said that the next stage was enforcement, but that was months ago, and again, nothing has happened. Residents are sick and tired of having to house their bikes in their apartments. Many have got rid of their bikes. CYC want us to be less reliant on cars. This lack of provision is not helping. Cleaning staff are shifting rubbish by hand in all weathers due to the lack of bin stores. These are basic services which we should not have to fight for, and certainly not for 6+ years. We were even faced with the bizarre situation where PJ Livesey said, here's some money, a paltry amount, go do it yourselves, build your own bike and bin stores. Presumably, when PJ Livesey originally applied for planning permission for the refurbishment of the residence, it did not include what we're already dealing with, what we're dealing with now. So almost all apartment front doors and communal doors that don't meet fire regulations, balconies that have to be replaced, paving that has subsided, trees and plants that have died because there was no irrigation system. I could go on and on. We, the residents, are asking for your help in enforcing original planning requirements that have not been fulfilled. We fully appreciate that these are extraordinary times. Pressures on yourselves as councillors and officials at CYC with limited budgets and low staffing levels are at an all-time high. However, I repeat, the only options for us are enforcement of planning or the Ombudsman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Preston, for bringing those things to my attention. And if some of those things can't be picked up in the public meeting today, I'll make sure we follow those up and get you details from Democratic Services.
Thank you.
And our last speaker, who's joining us, if you're watching us online, you'll be able to see, is Councillor Kilbane, who's also speaking on item 4. Thank you, Councillor.
Last and by every means least, because I think the other two speakers have covered quite a bit of the ground that I was going to refer to. So I'll be brief, but firstly, welcome, Councillor Mason, to your new role. Chance for a fresh start and a fresh look at things. And one of those things I think would be enforcement, as we've just heard. If you look at the report, enforcement rates are low, and Section 215, getting people to tidy up their grounds when they're causing lack of amenity, almost, well, non-existent some years. Now, I understand that it's a question of resource, and I understand that enforcement is a complex and technical aspect of the work of the planning department. But at the end of the day, the public expects that the plans that have been approved are what will be built. And if they're not built, then that will be enforced by the City of York Council. So I'm asking you, Councillor Mason, to prioritise enforcement in your role and give it the resources that it needs. We just heard there from a tenant of the residence, formerly Terry's Chocolate Factory. Essentially, the developers there, PJ Livesey, have been playing games for 6 years and playing games with our council planning department, submitting retrospective planning applications that were wholly inadequate and we're never going to get through. In fact, they've got another one in at the moment that's nothing like the original plans that were approved. And because they keep saying that they're going to fix it, even though we kind of suspect they never are, our planning department is left hanging on where they should be drawing a line and saying, no, we're going to enforce what was originally planned and make you build what you got permission for. And that's just one example. There'll be scores of examples like that across the whole of the city. And it is a major source of frustration for our residents that planning that gets approved and is not built to that spec is not enforced. So we ask you to look at resourcing that more in the year to come. And just on the economic strategy, I think it's sometimes a shock to residents to find out that we have some of the poorest people in the country living in York. We have many people living amongst the 10% most deprived areas of the ward, with that gap in life expectancy that Councillor Douglas referred to. So basically, if you live in Westfield, chances are you're going to have 10 years less life than if you live in Copmanthorpe. So that's 10 years less time spent with the grandkids or your family or going on holidays or whatever it is you would have done with those 10 years, simply because of where you live. And it's not addressed at all in this economic report. It's referred to vaguely, and in the published report online on page 22, where the results of the engagement with with hard to reach groups should be. There's a little edit note saying there's a placeholder there for the information to be added. Well, I think that's indicative of the priorities that are given to these groups, which aren't hard to reach. You know, just walk around Hull Road, Clifton, Westfield. There's plenty of people around there you can talk to. So there's no measures in this strategy to improve the health outcomes and life expectancy in our most deprived wards, even though our own public health team's work shows that economic factors are the #1 cause of ill health and early death. And that really does need to be prioritised. So I would ask you, Councillor Mason, to crack a few heads together, get the public health team involved in the strategy, and let's have some real and meaningful economic change for the residents of York. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corbyn. Thank you, Mom. Brilliant. Right, so we'll move on with the agenda. So item 4 is a planning enforcement cases update, and Becky Eads will be taking that item. So Becky, if you can talk us briefly through the report and any recommendations.
Thank you. By way of an update, in 2021, we had 606 new planning enforcement cases. We closed 648, so we closed more than we received. A total of 496 investigations remain open, so these can be over the previous years or the ones. We served 7 enforcement notices. If you compare that to 2020, which obviously was a blip, I think is a nice way of putting it, we had 526 cases opened and we closed 504, and we served 2 enforcement notices. Of the ones we had in 2021, 137 cases were not expedient to pursue. So basically that means that we weren't in a position to take any further action on them. 28 were found to not need planning permission, and 169 were found to be not in breach of planning control, and 68 breaches were rectified following work undertaken by the team, and 7 were granted planning permission. There's currently 36 enforcement cases awaiting the outcome of the planning application. And this, I think, was alluded to a bit earlier. Unfortunately, when there's a planning application in, usually planning enforcement stops, because that's how the system works. The application is to rectify usually what works have taken place, but that is a point of frustration, and we understand that, but that's part of the planning process. There's then a run through of the enforcement notices we've served. We then go on to talk about the last 12 months. In the last 12 months, we've had 3 retirements within the team. So then we had to make a decision about how we resource the team. We've actually put an extra 0.8 resource in there. And we are now in the process of getting our new 3 full-time officers trained up and on the system, and they are working really hard, and we're closing quite a lot of cases. So we're back into a positive position compared to this time last year when we were really low resource, and much better position now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's fair to say, from the information I'm aware of, that you have had those challenges in terms of staffing, and it sounds like we're moving into a much stronger picture. Obviously, there was things brought up during the public speaking, and it might be that it's not the time for you to pick those up with me now, but if it's something you don't feel you can comment on now, something we can pick up outside of this meeting.
Yeah, I'll turn to the first speaker. In terms of planning enforcement, we have had that for 2 years, and what we're trying to do is resolve that situation. We think there is a way to resolve it, but it does take time to try and negotiate. We are aware of it. We'll progress that as soon as we can.
Yeah, okay. Something I can keep on my radar as well to
Yeah.
keep an understanding of what's going on there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay.
And there's no recommendations. It's just literally receiving this report as an update. And I think, as Councillor Kilbane said, planning enforcement is something I come across as a ward councillor. So, something I'll be interested to see how it happens. And hopefully, like I said, with these additional hours and new staff, we can really make some progress in moving things forward. So thank you very much for that. Right, item 5 moves us on to the York economic strategy and partnerships. So Simon, are you taking this report initially? Tracy?
If I can just give you a
Yeah,
brief
of course,
introduction,
of course.
Councillor Mason, and then Simon will take you through the details of the draft strategy. So this is an update on the previous themes that we'd identified to drive forward the refresh of the economic strategy. And it takes some of those concepts further and starts to articulate them in terms of measures and actions and objectives. But it is, however, still a piece of consultation. So this is still a work in progress. And the points that were well made by our speakers about the relationship between this strategy and other key strategies are now coming into clear focus with the series of scrutiny sessions that we're about to hold with the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Scrutiny Board, the Economy in Place Scrutiny Board, and the Climate Change Scrutiny Board, where the interlinking themes will get drawn out and any gaps filled, and making it much clearer how those the competing objectives within those are going to be balanced out. I think the themes drawn out by the speakers today around the relationship between poverty and health inequalities and the economy are really important. There is a placeholder because we don't have the detail, because this precedes us going into another stage of public consultation where we're going to try and get below the surface of that one. And the way in which some themes that are already articulated here about increasing wage levels, helping people into work, and developing skills levels to facilitate that progress will all help to tackle the embedded issue of poverty that we see in some of our most deprived communities. But I think there is probably room for improvement in terms of how we draw that theme out and make it more clear. So I'll hand over now to Simon to take you through what this is setting out and how we intend to proceed over the summer before finalising this strategy in the autumn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I do that, I'll just add that the placeholder is there for some focus groups that are happening, or just happened actually. We're just beginning to get the results back from a series of really detailed discussions with a whole series of different types of communities in York around not just the economic strategy, but also our transport strategy, our health and well-being strategy, and our climate change strategy, because it's very important that all of those pieces of work together and say the same things rather than pulling against each other. So I'm really pleased with doing that work, and that we are doing a bit more of a deep dive with those particular communities, and I'm sure what comes back from that will inform the final iteration of this strategy. And while it's important that we do recognise that there are people in York who experience very difficult, challenging economic circumstances, I think it's also really important that we reflect on the success and strength of York's economy as well. York's economy is doing very well. We have pay and productivity above that in the surrounding area, the highest in Yorkshire. We have continued high levels of employment in the city and very high skill levels amongst our workforce. And the last 20 or so years have seen over 20,000 highly skilled jobs created in our economy. And those are most of the jobs that have been created in York. So we have an economic strategy over quite a long time that has really focused on those aspects and has been very successful. The challenge, however, is that York's economy, although it's much stronger than other economies in Yorkshire, is only average in national terms. And we think that really shows the challenge for levelling up that the government faces. What that means for York is trying to push York into the top 25% of places in terms of pay and productivity. I'll come back to that a little later. So while we have a strong economy, it's also important to recognise, of course, there are some challenges as well. We have very high levels of part-time work. That in itself is not a challenge. People take part-time work for all sorts of reasons, and mostly not because they would rather have a full-time job. However, part-time work in York is focused in low-waged industries, and there's a challenge there to try and increase the range of flexible employment that there is across the city. York's unique nature as a city and our setting and the importance of the Green Belt means that growth in York must happen in different ways from simply taking more land and developing it. And that puts a challenge in terms of how we best use not only what new sites we have, such as York Central, but how we use, reuse and reinvent some of our existing employment sites, and the real importance of keeping land that's used for employment in York in that particular use to avoid businesses having to leave the city as they grow. We think that's possible to do that, and we're working closely with our planning colleagues to think about how we take that forward in the future. Net zero is also a challenge, and businesses have a massive role to play in helping the city achieve its net zero ambitions. They need assistance, particularly as we go into certain uncertain times ahead. The challenges of inflation are really just beginning to be seen in our economy and in the national and global economy, and the challenges around recruitment that have been reported for a very long time by many businesses continue. Those matters, of course, take priority for business owners, but we need to do something to help them get more involved in the net zero agenda, and to show how actually helping the city become net zero is actually in their business's interest as well. So the strategy you have before you shows a continued focus, as I say, from the approach we've taken over the last 20 years to continue to grow our high value sectors, the bioeconomy, the really important insurance sector in York, tech, digital and creative businesses, and of course, as we've spoken many times recently, the rail sector. Is really important that we bring Great British Rail's headquarters to the city, and that we continue to support our really important, globally important rail sector. We add to that a new focus on the high volume sectors in the city, the retail, hospitality, social care, where the challenge is to drive up productivity and wages, and try and make those sectors even better employers. A new focus that we've shown through the pandemic in terms of working particularly with micro businesses and recognising the importance of our small business community. The vast majority of employment in the city is through very small firms, and we have learned a lot over the last 2 years in terms of the kind of support that they need and how we can provide that support. And a new focus in terms of part-time and flexible work, as I said, to part-time and flexible work, particularly for a highly skilled workforce such as we have in the city, with overall aims, as I've said, of pushing GVA in York into the top 25% of places in the UK. That means about a 4% increase in GVA in York that we're aiming for over the next 10 years. I think that's achievable. We need to get pay into the top 25% in the city for part-time pay. That we're pretty close to that anyway. For full-time pay, that means something like 10% increase in what people are paid on average in York over the next 10 years. And we need to make sure we keep the skills level of our workforce in that top 25%. We are there at the moment. We need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. All of those ambitions are expressed through the 5 themes in the strategy: a global city, a greener economy, a thriving workforce, thriving businesses, and an economy driven by good business, and then translated into some really important key actions. So we've highlighted at this stage, I'm sure more will come through the consultation over the summer, but we've highlighted the importance of developing a new economic partnership. We have continuing to deliver the key developments in the city. York Central is so important to our city. The changes that are beginning to happen to the city centre and making sure that they continue and really support our economy are really important. Using, as I said, making sure that we work with the planning system so that we drive the right kind of growth and we keep our employment land as employment land is really important, that we make sure that what employment land we have becomes even better and more productive, that we help our micro businesses to be as productive as they can as well. I said it's a huge number of people in the city working in those businesses, so driving up productivity means working with those businesses to help them become more productive. Growing flexible working options in all sectors, particularly in high skilled sectors, and supporting our workforce to adapt to the future and building our global clusters, whether that's rail, bioeconomy, and also touch on the importance of our heritage-based media arts cluster. So what has come through the experience of developing the Jorvik Viking Centre and how that's influenced museums and storytelling all over the world is actually one of York's great untold stories as well. So some real key actions, a real sense of purpose in terms of what we want to deliver, and then the development of a new economic partnership to help oversee that, to steer it and to refine that. We present Annex B some draft terms of reference for your consideration for that economic partnership, certainly as a starting point. We would see that partnership meeting perhaps twice a year and dividing into subgroups. We think that it would work well to divide those by the themes in the strategy, and that those perhaps would meet more often. So we set out for you there a draft economic strategy that's going to go for consultation over the summer, and we're asking for you to consider that strategy, and if you support what we've put forward, and then to press the green button in terms of moving on to the next phase of consultation, and also to begin the work on developing that new economic partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. No, I think it's great, and the feedback I've had already from the engagement I've started to have with different business leaders around the city is that they've been really pleased to be part of the engagement that's already happened. And I think there's real buy-in to this, and particularly the kind of 5 strands that run through it. I think there's a lot of excitement actually about, the next step now of moving it forward. And I think you're right, Trish, to point out that, this is in line with the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy and pulling all those things together. So actually, it's not that we don't think health's important, but actually it's part of a wider picture of interlocking strategies and policies. I know it's been through 9 different kind of decision sessions or meetings. Has anybody ever made a request for health to be specifically put in this document, or do we think that is the best approach, to just have those 2 overlapping strategies?
We've not had that request. We've not had that request to date, but I think that the joint scrutiny meeting with health and wellbeing will be helpful in I think it's all about finer focus in how this is articulated. It's threaded through the strategy currently, but maybe it does just need refining slightly further. We had the same issue with the climate change scrutiny last time we went to discuss this, and they wanted to just to tighten up the focus of it. And I suspect that this is about making it clear where the links between action on low pay are related to health outcomes as well. But it wouldn't be correct for us in an economic strategy to start to articulate how the health and social care system is going to respond to health inequalities. It's not the right place, but making the links is.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually looking at the representation we want on the economic partnership going forward, it's very clear that health and social care is part of that monitoring process of the panel. So I think there's definitely a strong link into there. There's nothing really else. I think some of the points the public speakers made around other council organisations being involved in the Good Business Charter is a good idea, Tracy, and that's something you could maybe bring back to me about how we can help other organisations that we've got a stake in, like Make It York and work with York to look at the Good Business Charter as something to consider. Yeah,
we can certainly write a letter on your behalf to request that they consider signing up to that.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. Brilliant. Well, there's nothing more from me. Thank you, Simon. Obviously a good report, and like I said, it's been delayed by the pandemic, but pleased that you finally got there. I'm just going to get to our 3 recommendations. So scrolling on the iPad. Here we go. So just to make it clear, so it's approving the draft economic strategy. It's initiating the next phase of the consultation for the strategy, which obviously will come back to exec, and obviously approving the draft terms of reference for the economic partnership. So I'm happy to move all of those recommendations and take us on to the next phase of the project. So thank you both for your time. Brilliant. Well, next item is urgent business, and there's no urgent business I've been made aware of, so I'm happy to close the meeting there. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for those that are watching online.